Welcome to another edition of HPS Insights. We have a great conversation today around the upcoming midterm elections. It is the first of what I hope will be a few conversations focusing on the business and policy impacts of a potential change in power in Congress starting this fall with the midterm elections. We have a couple great folks from our team on to discuss where we are about 200 days out from those midterm elections. I did want to make one quick note that we recorded this session a few hours before some big news broke from Jonathan Martin and Alex Burns, New York Times writers who are soon to release a new book on the end of the Trump presidency, including some of the events of January 6th. There's been a lot of headlines about Kevin McCarthy's actions in the days following that. We do not get into that in this episode. I expect it'll remain a newsworthy element to discuss in future episodes. But for now, we're focusing on what's going to happen in about 200 days and how that'll impact the DC policymaker community. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and we'll be back in future weeks with more on this topic.
From Hamilton Place Strategies in Washington, D.C., this is the HPS Insights podcast.
Welcome back to HPS Insights, a podcast from Hamilton Place Strategies, analyzing the current events impacting the business and political communities. I'm your host, Bryan DeAngelis, a partner here at HPS, and today I'm bringing in two of our experts, some of my colleagues. Jonathan Graffeo, who's a managing director here at the firm, recently came over to us after a long career in the Senate, both comms director for the Senate Banking Committee and then deputy staff director for the Appropriations Committee under Senator Dick Shelby. And returning to HPS Insights is Stacy Kerr, one of my fellow partners here at the firm. Stacy comes in and does a lot of these fun podcasts with me, and I appreciate it. But Stacy, as many of you listeners know, was a former advisor to Speaker Pelosi. And we're here today to talk a little bit about the midterm elections. We are 201 days away from the midterm. I tried my best to schedule this for tomorrow, but calendars didn't align. But we're 201 days out. There's a lot of talk heating up in DC just about how the president's doing, how Democrats in power are doing in general. It's looking like a big Republican wave heading towards us. So I thought we'd all get in the room and start talking a little bit about the likelihood of that conventional wisdom coming true and what that might mean for the work we do here and our clients. So Jonathan, let me pick on you a little bit first. You're the Republican in the room. How's it looking for your party heading into November?
It's looking pretty good right now. Obviously, President Biden's approval numbers are in the basement right now. I think you saw Leader McConnell and others come out and kind of needle him about that last week. They're feeling good. They're feeling confident, and I think they've probably got reason to feel that way. Particularly, the monster that's hanging out there for most people is inflation right now. In addition to being uneasy about what's going on in Russia and the Ukraine, so things are definitely trending in Republicans' direction. In terms of what it might mean for folks going forward, if you have Republicans take over either the House and or the Senate. And then you've still got the Biden administration there. I think you shift to looking more at regulatory agencies and things that they can do of their own volition. Same thing with executive orders from the president. So I think that's probably the main shift. You'll see Republicans, I think, highlighting stuff like issues like immigration and wanting to shine a spotlight on that. Certainly in the 2 years leading into the next presidential election. So
right around the corner, we'll be gearing up for 2024 soon.
You know
Stacy, jump in here. What do you think the rest of the year looks like, and what does November look like with Republicans likely to take control?
Yeah, well, this is usually the part in the cycle where we start talking to our clients and everybody's talking about the likelihood of legislation between now and the midterms. So we should talk a little bit about that. But,
yes.
But obviously there's some certainly favorable signs for Republicans right now. I agree with Jonathan. I won't be the Democrat to come on here and tell you that's not true.
It's all blue skies.
This is an uphill battle for Republicans or for Democrats. But I think it's important for us to remember that what are midterm elections historically based on? I think it's really three things, and they're all three things that are very present right now. The party in power does usually have a disadvantage in midterm elections. The midterm elections tend to be much more tied to the presidential approval numbers. And as Jonathan said, we see a president right now in I think maybe low 40s. It's even dipped into the 30s.
Some
that
states,
is certainly
he's
a problem.
dipping in the 30s. Yep.
Big problem, right? I think, and then finally, just people's perception of the economy and maybe even the world now. And the interesting thing to me about, we don't know what's going to happen, but as we think about what the impacts of this are between now and November, and then a potential shift in power after November, there's a lot going on that's like perception versus reality. Right. So like we have perceptions of what's going on in the economy, and then we have the reality of what's going on. People perceive that the economy is terrible. The economy is actually not doing poorly. The economy, by many economist metrics, the economy is strong. Inflation is
economy's on fire.
Problem.
Inflation aside, it's absolutely humming along.
Unemployment, right? This is a great time to be looking for a job. The reality of politics that we all know from where we've worked and that people is that you have to deal with people's perception, not with reality. And that just is an uphill battle for the president and for Democrats who are messaging in this climate. So a lot of interesting, I think we'll see some historical things from the past that will guide us over the next 6 months. And I think there's this is also a bit of an unprecedented time that we're coming out of a world that feels more complicated than ever. And, we don't know what people are going to ultimately, how they're going to feel about that.
Yeah, I would agree. Certainly perception plays a huge role. And one thing that I would point out too that I think goes along with what Stacy is saying is there's a certain cumulative anxiety in the country from the past several years. If you go back, certainly it was there in the Trump years anyway, but then you had the cultural unrest, you had COVID, you had January the 6th, and now you're looking at inflation, you're looking at unrest.
Not to mention global conflict.
I think there's just a cumulative anxiety out there that affects people's perceptions and on the downside right now. But there is a definite reality that people feel at the grocery store in the checkout line when they're filling up their cars. Those things are real. And the numbers from that economists will point out about wage growth and et cetera are also real. But in terms of what people actually feel in their day-to-day lives, that's, wage growth is not as important to you if it's being wiped out by inflation.
Right.
So,
and I do think in moments of that anxiety that you describe, the American people tend to look for balanced government. I think with a president of the Democratic Party in power, they will sort of lean towards Republicans a little more to have that balance. Now, all things are local, and I think some of these races are going to get pretty entertaining. I say that with air quotes for our listeners, but I do think Republicans will end up kind of winning back both chambers, managing on a pretty tight margins that we are now already. That's going to be both historically and just where we are a tough thing for Democrats to overcome. But I want to go back to a little bit of Stacy's point too on perception. I also feel like that's been true of Biden's performance, that perception and reality are not totally aligned. He actually has passed some major pieces of legislation. He's actually done a great job, I think personally, with the global conflict, the crisis in Ukraine, with some of the work here at home on the economy to the extent the president has influence over that. But Build Back Better and some of these other issues that just dominated headlines have gave the perception that he's been failing on his agenda, that Democrats as a whole, disagree with me if you don't think that's true. But the question I want to ask is, what really can Biden and congressional Democrats do over the next few legislative weeks we have left to maybe notch another win?
Yeah, I think we've got 6 or 7 weeks here before the August recess of real legislating. And then as people know, in a midterm election, not much is people spend time in their district. So the fall will not be a time for legislating. So it's a really short time. I think the biggest thing to watch right now is what happens with the Build Back Better and whether that can get revived in some form. There are certainly many, I would count myself among them, that were concerned about the strategy that Democrats employed in a fairly evenly divided Congress of going big, and whether or not that was actually possible with a 3-seat majority in the House and a very evenly divided Senate, and strategically whether that was wisest. We see, I think, maybe the course correction now to realistically what can get revived out of Build Back Better, obviously building on the negotiations that happened. I think, one thing that's going to be different, I think, with Build Back Better is, all those negotiations were happening in public.
Yes.
And, we saw who was coming down to the White House, and then they would put out a press release on where they were, and you knew where everybody stood, and everybody was sort of, the White House tells us there's a lot going on in private now. And I think we're not going to see as much. I
think they learned a lesson there. Yeah.
Roll out. Yeah. In public, if they are to get anything done. And once again, we've got, Joe Manchin is a pivotal figure in this, and watching what he will support. Some of the states like Arizona have a very competitive, one of the, I think, 4 or 5 most competitive Senate races. And so what happens to the senators in Arizona might be even a little different than it was 6 or 8 months ago at the beginning of this cycle. So, now again, what happens legislatively is still different than what happens from a messaging perspective. And that is where we've had a disconnect, right, with what's happening in Washington. Inside Washington, Joe Biden is very different than outside Washington, Joe Biden. And we see the White House trying to get him out on the road. They want to get more local press. It's a very smart strategy, I think, because of everything that's going on. It's very hard to get the headlines and the news that you want to make nationally. Yeah,
and so far, even with some pretty dismal poll numbers in these states, those incumbents that are, at risk of losing their seat, like Maggie Hassan in New Hampshire, are welcoming Biden. I was encouraged, or at least intrigued, to see, her campaigning up there with them, using the president to push the infrastructure bill, to push the work she's doing on that. So we'll see if that lasts. Incumbents who are in danger tend to distance themselves from a president, especially if they're sitting in the high 30s, low 40s. But I did notice that yesterday and thought that was a telling sign. But let's take a quick break here, and I want to come back and talk a little bit more about the politics of the midterms and what we can expect to see from who and what else might unfold over the next few months. You're listening to HPS Insights. We'll be right back.
Hamilton Place Strategies, HPS, is an analytical public affairs consulting firm with offices in Washington, D.C., New York, and California. HPS uses substantive analysis to understand complex topics and create public affairs tools to explain issues to target audiences and reach critical stakeholders. We achieve our clients' goals by enhancing understanding of issues, products, and companies, and ultimately improving outcomes. Learn more at hamiltonplacestrategies.com or follow us on Twitter at HPS Insight.
We're back on HPS Insights. I'm here today talking with Stacy Kerr and Jonathan Graffeo about the 2022 midterm elections. Jonathan, just before the break, we were talking about Biden's agenda and the work he's doing. I want to ask you a little bit, what do you expect to see the Republican playbook be, the agenda they want to put forward as we get closer to the midterms?
Yeah, I think you can expect the obvious, quite frankly. They're gonna keep hammering away on inflation, on the effect that that's having on people in their everyday lives. You've also seen kind of an uptick, and you will continue to see an uptick in focus on immigration, especially as we roll into the summer months and those cyclical numbers kick up just like they do every summer. Republicans will focus on that as well. So I think those are a couple of things. Plus, Republicans are going to go after what they see as corporate wokeness too. I mean, you're seeing it with the situation in Disney and other places right now. That's something where they feel like they have an advantage, and so far it looks like they may.
They definitely have the fight to themselves. Democrats are terrible in this regard, where we shy away from that conflict. We don't want the president talking about it. We don't want to talk about it, and we let Republicans.
And it's Bryan. It's something that I think that we've got to get. I have the opinion that this is our new world order. This is our era. People across the board in politics, in business, this is going to be the era of shared power. It just is the shift from we talk about it all the time, right? The shift from shareholders to more stakeholders, regardless of what party you're in. I think that's the era we're in, and I think Democrats are going to have to find a way to navigate and get comfortable with this, because I think simply seeding it and hoping that it goes away and that we can distract and we can take the high road and talk about kitchen table issues is not going to be enough to
agree. We need a good answer. Yeah, totally.
Kitchen table matters. Issues matter to voters, but these cultural issues are visceral.
Yeah,
that's what drives people out in a lot of circumstances.
Well, the cultural issues have come to the kitchen table now. I mean, not to be cheesy about it, but right, like,
yeah, that's a good point.
Talking about with my kids about who's wearing masks at school and who's not wearing masks and what they're going to do, and so all of this has become super hyper localized. I mean, look what was going on with suburban moms in the Northeast who were like revolting against masks 3 months ago, right before there was mask mandates. These are
and it's not going away with COVID.
The people that people need to win elections.
Yeah.
So we can't separate the cultural issues from the politics and sort of the moment that we're in.
No, I think that's right, and she would kill me if she heard me say this, but my wife never cared about politics at all, as long as I've been involved in politics. But we live in Northern Virginia, and over the last year, when you've seen those hyper local issues, whether it's about the curriculum or about mask mandates, those types of things, it really got her interested and involved. So, yeah, I think you're right, Stacy. Those issues are at the kitchen table now.
It's true. Jonathan and I are neighbors, but I've got 4 or 5 neighbor dads on a text chain, and I can tell you for years, regardless of 2020 election, anything, that text chain's been about golf and sports. And in the last couple months, it's been about the superintendent for Fairfax County Schools.
It's crazy.
I can't believe, that the anger around it. And it's a little shocking to me for someone who lives in politics every day.
Yeah.
But these things are starting to bleed out, and they're not going away with COVID ending or hopefully ending or anything else. They're here to stay.
But something else, and this is probably a podcast for another time. We should, I think companies should really be watching states like Virginia, where you guys are, and seeing somebody like a Glenn Youngkin come in, because what we're also going to see, I think, is shifts within the Republican Party, the type of Republican that can get elected, the Democratic Party, the types of Democrats that are going to be attractive to candidates in these districts that are going to matter. And that has legs far beyond just these midterm elections. But to have Glenn Youngkin come in as an outsider, and then to see what issues he chose and what he picked and how he was able to put together a coalition to beat a really formidable candidate in a state that had been turning, not even purple, really turning blue. I think there's some lessons there.
Yeah, and I think you're skipping over one of the key parts of that, and I wanted to ask you both on this. Youngkin gets a lot of credit for the way he managed Trump through that campaign. And I think it's going to be, like everyone else in Washington, maybe I'm stating the obvious, it's going to be really fascinating to watch how Trump engages in these midterm elections, what that says about his own future. And I don't know, is it going to help in some states, be a drag in other states? Is it going to be a drag nationally? I think there's still a lot of raw, nerves on this stuff across the country.
Yeah, he provokes that reaction in people. And to Stacy's point, never have the political calculations on what will win in a race been more fluid or uncertain. Right. And yeah, in some cases, people would be, especially in Republican primaries, begging Trump to say something on their behalf, and others would just rather him stay away, period. And so it's different across the country.
And it's baffling for those of us who are students of the history here, right? If I told you in most election years that the number one candidate in your party for president hates your potential speaker and the potential majority leader in the Senate hates him, and the guy who's running your Senate campaign arm is not getting along with your potential majority leader, I would say that party's doomed. In November. All of those things are true about Republicans right now, and we're looking at a Republican sweep.
Yeah, I think, honestly, I think that maybe the person that'll be the biggest factor is not even in an elected position. I think it might be Jay Powell.
Yeah.
Because if we are looking at, certainly they were signaling, 6 or 7 rate increases?
That's right.
Over the coming years, they were very clearly saying that the situation in Russia unfolded, and I think threw that into some uncertainty. But if inflation keeps ticking up, then you might be in a situation where Carter was with Paul Volcker. And is Jay Powell going to play the Paul Volcker role and choke inflation out with rate increases? I don't know. But if he does, certainly.
I think all of while there was a lot of attention to whether or not President Biden would reappoint Jay Powell, I think that might have been the understated, underwatched sort of story of making a determination of what happens in the next 2 years, 4 years, what happens in the presidential election, and what that means for what people think about Democrats' ability to control the economy from a presidential level. So.
All right, we have a couple minutes left here. I want to ask one final question. Let's flip conventional wisdom around. What's the perfect hand Democrats need to draw to hold on? Let's get rid of the House. I'll be a little realistic. To hold on to the Senate, what do Democrats need to do? Or where do they need to get lucky, I guess, is another way to phrase it.
Maybe I'll go first here. I think two things to watch. Senate, House, everything. I think two things to watch. If I was a company operating in this political climate over the next 6 months and over the next 2 years and the presidential election after that, I would also be watching these regulators. Next week, guys, like Lena Khan's getting a full slate of, right? I think we're expecting a confirmation at the FTC where Lena Khan will have a full slate. If you can't legislate, you move to regulation. The regulators in the Biden administration will still be there 2 year, whatever happens in a midterm election. So that's one thing to watch is still, as we move away from legislating, certainly Build Back Better, but what happens on regulation?
Can I ask a quick question there? I'm going to step on my own question here, but on legislating with Republicans holding Congress, should any of our clients, should any of us believe in that Biden-McConnell relationship? Do we get anything productive out of the two of them in 23 and 24?
No.
No. Wait, let me echo that. No.
Got it. All right. I had to ask.
No. There's no political advantage for them to work together. There is not a political advantage. And with things so closely divided, I think we overstated Democrats having control of everything. You control it. You control the agenda. It means a lot. Don't get me wrong. We have a 3-seat majority in the House.
Yeah.
and an evenly divided Senate. So not only should we be looking at will the House and the Senate flip, but by what margins? And then that's where the political incentives people have. And everybody's looking ahead 2 more years to how to grow those majorities.
I had to ask. And I interrupted you, Jonathan. So the original question, if you can put a Democratic hat on for a minute, what's the perfect straight they need to get to hold on to the Senate?
It's tough because you've got big
hard-hitting questions here on
macro
HPS
factors
Insights
going against you. So part of my hesitation is I don't think it's in their hands. I think it's a matter of whether inflation can kind of tick down a little bit. Maybe the situation in Ukraine. I'm not an expert there, but maybe you don't know how things will change on the ground there and how that can inure to the president's benefit depending on how he reacts to it. But those are legislatively, I don't see it.
Yeah. I mean, my own opinion is, it is the inflation. If we start seeing those numbers tick down without going into a recession, but we're seeing wages go up, we're seeing unemployment low, inflation tick down. I think we obviously have to hold Nevada and Arizona and New Hampshire and Georgia, and then we're really going to have to get lucky in Pennsylvania and one of these others to pull this off.
Yep, I think that's right.
Well, thank you guys. My plan is my hope is we do a lot of these between now and Election Day. So I look forward to having both of you back on, and we'll pull in some of our other colleagues as well as we think about the midterms for our clients from the political, the regulatory, the legislative perspective. We'll have plenty to talk about. But thank you to all the listeners for tuning in to another episode of HPS Insights. Again, special thanks to Jonathan and Stacy for joining. You can download this on any of your favorite podcast apps or find more information about us at hamiltonplacestrategies.com. I'm your host, Bryan DeAngelis. As always, thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to the HPS Insights podcast, produced by Hamilton Place Strategies. For the latest updates, follow us on Twitter at HPS Insights and follow us on the web at hamiltonplacestrategies.com.